to be sustainable, energy has to be profitable. If it costs money, then we have a financial crisis, we have a recession, and you can't afford it anymore. Of the various ways that you can invest your money, the very best is in energy conservation. If you reduce the energy you use, that's money you don't have to spend, and it's like getting a return on an investment. But the investment that you get, the return you get, is 15%, 20%. It's very, very high. This is the easiest way of, instead of getting new energy, just use less energy, and it's equally good. And it doesn't cost very much. If you put in on the roof of your building a better roof, or you just give yourself some insulation so that you don't use as much heat in the winter, then it pays back your investment. If you spend 1,000 lira, I'm sorry, 1,000 euros. Spend 1,000 euros. Within 2 years, you will have that money back. Now, there's no other investment you can make where by spending 1,000 euros, you will get 1,000 euros back within 2 years. It takes longer to build new energy, putting better insulation in your houses, having automobiles that use less energy to take you to the same place to do the same thing. These are the easy things to do. We have an expression that you can pick the low-hanging fruit. It's much easier than picking the fruit that's way up high. This is fruit that's already fallen down on the ground, and it's there for the eating. There are several new technologies in solar cells that are very inexpensive and hold the promise of having pretty high efficiency. That combination is what you really need. So there are some, mostly in the thin film solar cells. There are technologies being developed now. They're being developed all around the world. One of my favorites is called SIGS. SIGS, C stands for copper, and then indium, gallium, selenium. These are thin cells where they basically spray them on, and then they heat it up and they turn this into a solar cell. And these are getting very inexpensive. They're under a euro per installed watt, and the price is going down very rapidly. And the technology is such that when I look at this technology, I say, how cheap can this get? And just as our computers have gotten much, much cheaper in recent years, likewise, these solar cells are getting very cheap. It's another technology, cadmium telluride, which is a similar technology, very thin cells. These things are flexible. They're not stiff. They don't crack when you bend them. They just bend. And the price of these is likewise coming down. So pretty soon, in a few years, I believe the cost of the solar cells will be so low that it will not be a big expense. Okay. The expense will be installing it, hooking up the wires, building the electronics. There are many sources of energy, and what I do for each one of the ones that you mentioned is I look at how much energy we can get per euro. For geothermal, for example, it's a wonderful success in Iceland. It's a wonderful success in California. Whenever you have the earth concentrating the energy for you, then it becomes practical. But most of geothermal cannot be made cheap enough for people to afford. Just to give an example, if we look at the sunlight that's coming down, it's about a kilowatt per square meter. If we look at the geothermal that's coming up, it's 1/10 of a watt per square meter. It is 10,000 times weaker. If you could build geothermal that was 10,000 times cheaper than a solar cell, I'd say it makes sense. Likewise for waves. You don't have many waves in Italy, certainly. And even if you were out on the coast, in California, we have lots of waves, but even there, you have to build something in salt water that will last and not have to be replaced after 10 years. Most I also have a company that looks at these things, and we try to help people who are making these decisions, because many of these technologies, there is energy, and you can get that energy. But if we can't afford to get the energy, then we won't replace coal. Coal is dirt cheap. And in the United States, we get half of our electricity from coal. And that's bad, because coal is very dirty. But unless you can compete with the price, we're not wealthy enough. The whole world isn't wealthy enough to go to very expensive sources of energy. I believe that the second generation is actually pretty good. Third generation, fourth generation, they get even better. But I wouldn't wait for the fourth generation, because most nuclear was rejected at a time when the people were unfamiliar with it, so they were frightened. They were scared because people would tell them scary stories, and they thought that the alternatives were fine. Natural gas is fine. Now, natural gas, you may be depending on Russia to get your natural gas, so it no longer looks so attractive. Oil, we once thought oil was very cheap and abundant, and there was no danger with oil. Well, I'm in the United States, and I believe my country is at war in Iraq because of oil. So it's just not true that oil has no dangers. It has enormous dangers. We're killing and have killed thousands of people over oil in these wars. Nuclear, we have to reevaluate it. It's time to look at it again and say, is it as dangerous as we thought? And when we do that, when I do that, my conclusion is, no, it's not so dangerous. People were afraid of it. It was easy to reject because there was very cheap oil and natural gas. Now that we know the dangers of those, we have to look at nuclear again. When we reevaluate it, it's not so bad. I don't see a future without nuclear, because nuclear is such a good source of energy, and people worry about the dangers of an accident. The Chernobyl reactor would never have been licensed in Italy, never would have been licensed in the United States. It was a terrible design. The nuclear waste problem is exaggerated, and it frightens mostly people who are not aware that the ground is already radioactive. Where do we get the uranium from? We get it from the ground. The ground is full of radioactivity. We're not adding a lot of radioactivity to the ground. And plutonium is not as dangerous as people think. To drink water with dissolved plutonium, you'd have to drink a huge amount of water to get a cancer. So the dangers have been exaggerated, and now that we recognize that fossil fuel is dangerous, it's not just the wars we fight over oil, but it's the dangers of global warming. I think nuclear will be with us for a long time.